The letter from the law firm was thick with the weight of dust and finality. My grandmother, Eleanor Blackwood, the reclusive matriarch I'd met exactly 3 times in my life, was gone. And to everyone's shock, especially my ambitious parents and my money-obsessed uncle, she had left everything to me, her only kindred spirit, the letter said. Everything was Blackwood Manor, a 25-room Gothic revival monstrosity perched on a cliff overlooking the stormy Oregon coast. It wasn't an inheritance, it was a burden, a decaying money pit of a burden that came with a single, bizarre condition. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Finch, who smelled of mothballs and regret, handed me the massive iron key in his Portland office. "The estate is yours, Miss Evans. The taxes are paid for this year. The contents are yours to dispose of as you see fit." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "There is, however, one non-legal but strongly urged stipulation from your grandmother, conveyed to me years ago." "Which is?" I asked, already feeling the weight of the key in my palm. "Do not, under any circumstances, open the doors to the west wing. They are locked for a reason." She was very clear. "Have the wing professionally sealed if you wish, but do not go in yourself." A shiver, completely unrelated to the office's air conditioning, traced my spine. "Why? What's in there?" "I have no idea," Finch said, his face impassive. "I never asked, and I advise you not to wonder. Some family histories are best left undisturbed. The rest of the house is more than sufficient." My parents, when I called, were livid. "Sell it," my mother shrilled. "That place is a death trap. Just take the money and run, Amelia." My uncle offered to handle the messy business of liquidation for a mere 40% fee. But I was a photographer, an artist. I saw the haunting beauty in the black and white photos I'd found of the manor online. I felt a pull, a curiosity that outweighed the dread. And I was running from my own life, a broken engagement, a stifling career in commercial photography. A crumbling mansion on a cliff sounded like the perfect place to disappear. A week later, my beat-up SUV was crunching up the overgrown gravel drive. Blackwood Manor rose against the steel-gray sky, all turrets, crooked chimneys, and windows like sightless eyes. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. The key turned in the massive front door with a groan that echoed through the cavernous foyer. The air inside was cold, still, and smelled of damp wood, old books, and secrets. Sheet-draped furniture hulked like sleeping ghosts. Portraits of severe-looking ancestors glared down from the walls. I spent the first day exploring the safe parts, the dusty library, the vast kitchen with a hearth big enough to roast an ox, and the conservatory filled with the skeletal remains of exotic plants. The silence was absolute, a physical presence. The door to the west wing was impossible to miss. It stood at the end of a long, dark-paneled hallway, twice as tall as the others, made of black oak banded with iron. No handle, just a heavy, antiquated lock. It didn't just look locked, it looked forbidden. That first night, I set up a makeshift camp in the library, wrapped in a sleeping bag before a meager fire in the grate. The wind howled around the cliffs, and the old house groaned and settled. I was almost asleep when I heard it. Music. Faint, delicate, and unmistakably the sound of a piano. A melancholic, lilting waltz, the notes slightly out of tune, echoing as if from a great distance. It was coming from somewhere deep within the house, from the direction of the west wing. My blood froze. The house was supposed to be empty. I'd checked every room. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The music played for a full minute, a haunting, beautiful piece that spoke of loneliness and longing. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was louder than the music. I spent the rest of the night wide-eyed, a fire poker gripped in my hand, listening to the wind and the pounding of my own heart. The next morning, in the cold light of day, I convinced myself it had been the wind whistling through a broken window or pipes groaning, a trick of an overactive imagination in a spooky house. I decided to start documenting the place, my professional instinct kicking in. I set up my camera and began to photograph the eerie beauty of my inheritance. But as I developed the first digital shots in my laptop, I saw them. Orbs of light that hadn't been visible to my eye, shadows in empty doorways that had a human shape, and in one shot, focused on the grand staircase, a faint shimmering transparency on the steps, the suggestion of a woman in an old-fashioned dress. Coincidence, dust, lens flare. I recited every logical explanation, but the chill in my bones remained. The second night, the piano music returned. This time it was closer, clearer, and it was accompanied by the soft, rhythmic sound of someone crying. That was it. Curiosity, now fused with a desperate need to prove I wasn't losing my mind, overrode fear and the lawyer's warning. I wasn't going to seal the wing. I was going to open it. The next day, I went into the nearest town, a mist-shrouded fishing village called Ravenswood. At the hardware store, I bought the heaviest bolt cutters they had. The old man behind the counter, his eyes the color of the sea, looked at my purchase and then at me. "You're the one up at Blackwood, aren't you?" "I am. I inherited it." He nodded slowly. "Eleanor's granddaughter. You favor her." He leaned forward. "Folks here leave that place be, especially the west side. Stories, you know." "What kind of stories?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He just shook his head. "Some doors are locked for a reason, miss. Some secrets ain't meant to be found." His words only fueled my resolve. I drove back, the bolt cutters on the passenger seat feeling like a weapon. As sunset painted the sky in bruised purples and reds, I stood before the black oak door. The house was silent, holding its breath. I fitted the jaws of the bolt cutters around the aged, thick padlock. With a grunt of effort, I squeezed. The sound of shearing metal was obscenely loud in the silent hallway. The lock clattered to the floor. I took a deep breath, pushed against the immense door, and stepped into the west wing. The air was different here, colder, drier, smelling of old roses and sorrow. The hallway was dark, but moonlight streamed through tall, grimy windows, illuminating floating dust. The rooms I passed were frozen in time, a salon with a harp covered in a shroud, a nursery with a beautifully carved crib, a mobile of tarnished silver stars hanging motionless above it. And at the end of the hall, double doors stood slightly ajar. From within, a soft golden light flickered, candlelight. The piano music began again, the same waltz, now coming from that room. Heart in my throat, I crept forward and pushed the door open. It was a grand music room. A magnificent, dust-covered Bosendorf grand piano dominated the space, and seated at the bench, her back to me, was a woman. She wore a gown of deep blue velvet, her ash-blonde hair coiled in an intricate updo. Her fingers, pale and graceful, moved over the yellowed keys, conjuring the heart-breaking waltz. This was no ghost from a photograph. This was real, solid. "Hello?" My voice was a dry rasp. The music stopped, her hands stilled. Slowly she turned, and I was looking into the face of my grandmother, Eleanor Blackwood, not as she was when she died at 87, but as she must have been in her glorious prime, maybe 30 years old. She was breathtakingly beautiful, and her eyes, the same storm gray as mine, held centuries of sorrow. "Amelia," she said, and her voice was like the wind through pines, familiar and ancient. "You opened the door." I couldn't speak. I could only stare. She smiled, a sad, tender curve of her lips. "I've been waiting for you. You have the sight, like I did, and you're brave enough to use the key." She gestured to the room around us. "This isn't a prison, my dear. It's a preservation, And now that you're here, I can finally tell you what we've been protecting and why the men in our family have always been so desperate to keep it locked away." She rose from the piano bench, her gown whispering against the floor. "The Blackwood women," she said, her gaze holding mine. "We don't just inherit a house, we inherit a curse and a power. And it's time you learned which one you are."